Hello, my name is Ashley Niemeyer, and I will be discussing job element method analysis. To begin, job element method analysis is the earliest of worker-oriented job analysis approaches and is most similar to work-oriented methods. It was developed by Ernest Primoff in 1958 and focuses on work behaviors and the results of said behaviors. An element is defined as a combination of behaviors and associated evidences. There are three types of elements to consider. The first is cognitive elements, which include such items as recognizing tools and their uses, reading blueprints, and computing means and standard deviations. Psychomotor elements include the ability to sense and perceive, and to carry out simple to complex motor actions. Examples of this are operating an electric drill or a chisel, or piloting a jet fighter. Lastly, work habits refer to collections of behaviors that are more motivational in character. The primary purpose for job element method analysis is the development of work samples, which can then be applied to personnel selection, performance evaluation, and training. Elements can also help to identify important aspects of overall job performance. For more details on this, you can read about J coefficient in our text on pages 70 through 71. There are 6 general steps for job element method analysis. The first step is to gather elements from subject matter experts. Experts will then rate each element on 4 rating scales. These scales include barely acceptable scale, superior scale, trouble likely if not considered scale, and lastly the practical scale. The analyst will derive scale values from subject matter experts' ratings. The derived ratings will then be shared with the subject matter experts. These derived scales include total value scale, item index scale, and training value scale. Results from these scales can then be used in the intended application of the job analysis. The procedure for job element method analysis includes 2 sessions. Each session is approximately 3 to 5 hours long. In the first session, subject matter experts will brainstorm and rate job elements and sub-elements. They will then rate each of these elements based upon the previously mentioned rating scales. The first scale is the barely acceptable scale, which requires a judgment to be made as to whether barely acceptable workers must possess an element to do the job. The second scale is the superior scale and asks subject matter experts to describe how useful the element is for distinguishing the superior worker. Following is the trouble likely if not considered scale, which asks subject matter experts to describe whether trouble is likely if this element is not included in an examination or a screen for new hires. Lastly is the practical scale, which asks subject matter experts whether job applicants are likely to possess the element. All of these scales are rated with a 3-category response. The subject matter expert will provide a 0 if the scale has some minimal value, a check mark if the scale applies somewhat, and a plus sign if the element is highly applicable to the job. For example, in the superior rating scale, if the element is not useful in distinguishing the superior worker, the subject matter expert will provide a 0. If the element is valuable in distinguishing the superior worker, the subject matter expert will provide a check mark. And lastly, if the element is very important for distinguishing the superior worker, the subject matter expert will provide a plus. Responses and scores will then be analyzed from the above-mentioned rating scales and prepared by the analyst for Session 2. In Session 2, the analyst will evaluate and combine the job element ratings above into 3 new derived scores. These new scores or new ratings are known as the derived scales. There are 3 derived scales which include the total value scale, the item index scale, and the training value scale. The total value scale refers to the value of the element in differentiating abilities of applicants for a job. The item index scale refers to the extent in which a sub-element is important in the content of a test. And lastly, the training value scale refers to the value of the element in training. Scores on these ratings will help to identify critical elements and sub-elements, which can then be put to developing a test for the intended application and purpose of the job analysis. An example of the job element method analysis was conducted by Primoff in 1958 doing a job analysis and selection of federal coal mine inspectors. In this example, applicants were assessed who demonstrated competence in necessary job elements for inspectors, regardless of how they acquired their competence. 32 elements were identified by subject matter experts. A few of these included physical fitness for work in mining, stamina for work in mining, ability for interpreting written instructions and regulations. Tests were assigned to evaluate each of these elements respectively, and a group of inspectors interviewed applicants based on these elements. Overall scores were then derived from written test scores and credit awarded to applicants based on interviews. Some issues and concerns to be aware of for job element method analysis. First, there is no evidence to support that the complex formulas used for the derived scales are in fact necessary. There are also legal issues to be concerned of when screening applicants in regards to elements based on subject matter experts' judgments. Some of the advantages of job element method analysis are that it focuses on observable behaviors rather than abstract mental states. It also makes use of work habits as elements. Lastly, some of the disadvantages of this method is that it avoids mental states, which can possibly have a negative impact on applicants later on. For example, some of the cognitive processes and states such as perceptual speed and verbal reasoning are not evaluated in this method. As a result, applicants who do not possess these states or processes may find themselves faltering in their duties or failing in their jobs, but this will not be identified until after they have been performing their job for some time. Lastly, this method heavily relies on the judgments of subject matter experts when analyzing and coming up with elements. This concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.